The Department of Homeland Security is in shutdown mode, but most DHS employees are continuing to work through the lapse in appropriations. In fact, many DHS personnel will also have to work without pay until the White House and lawmakers negotiate a funding deal. For more on the details, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now. Justin, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
All right, people are watching this. How is the ongoing shutdown actually affecting DHS operations?
Yeah, well, it's almost like you wouldn't know there's a shutdown because about 90% of the more than 260,000 employees at DHS are going to continue showing up to work through the shutdown. That's according to DHS's shutdown plan. And so airport security screening done by the Transportation Security Administration, Secret Service and their protection mission, even FEMA and their processing or their work on ongoing disasters, while it will be impacted, it won't completely stop. And that's the case across DHS. And then, of course, there's Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection, those two agencies that are kind of at the center of this shutdown squabble between the White House and congressional Democrats. Well, they're going to continue showing up to work, and they actually have a lot of funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that passed last year that they can draw upon if this shutdown really drags out and they decide to prioritize certain things.
With all of the operations ongoing that you just mentioned, which DHS employees actually will be going without pay during this shutdown period?
Yeah, well, we know that there's a few broad categories. Transportation Security Administration employees, the airport screeners, they will be going without pay almost unquestionably. We saw that during the last shutdown over the fall, the 43-day shutdown, where TSA airport screeners, showed up to work, missed multiple paychecks. And in the latter portion of that shutdown, in the latter weeks, we saw an increase in call-outs and people not showing up to work because maybe they decided to go work their second job because they needed money. And that is one of the things that forced lawmakers to eventually come to the table and end that shutdown, because obviously seeing lines queue up at airport screening lanes is a bipartisan issue, to say the least. There's a lot of other employees at DHS who will go without pay if this thing stretches much longer than a week. Typically ICE, CBP, Secret Service agents, a lot of the law enforcement components would go without pay. But we saw during the last shutdown that the Trump administration prioritized those law enforcement officers for pay by moving some funding around. What they didn't do is pay the civilian side of those agencies. And so all those civilians at those agencies will go without pay during the shutdown as well.
One of the other groups that frequently rises to the top during the shutdown is the Coast Guard, as it falls under DHS. They have active duty folks and civilians. What's the story there?
Yeah, well, the Coast Guard, of course, will continue showing up to work. And during the last shutdown, as you alluded to, the active duty military service members in the Coast Guard were paid because, if you remember, the Trump administration made it a priority to pay all military service members during that shutdown. But there are, of course, thousands of Coast Guard civilians who will go without pay. And for the Coast Guard specifically, they are in the midst of a big kind of reform and modernization effort, Coast Guard Force Design 2028. So what this shutdown will affect for the Coast Guard certainly is some of those more forward-leaning efforts, some of their recruiting efforts, things like that could be tripped up if, again, this shutdown stretches on for much longer than a week.
Well, you've talked quite a bit about what will continue to happen even though it's shut down. What will stop at DHS?
Yeah, so much of DHS is operational and mission critical, safety, law enforcement, things like that. And as we've talked about, those things continue. But a lot of the strategy work, a lot of the policy work that happens at DHS headquarters and at the different component headquarters, that largely ceases during the shutdown. And then you go to a place like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. They're one of those DHS components where actually most of their staff will be or has gone home and has essentially laid down tools, as they say in the UK. And they will no longer be able to do things like check in on federal network cybersecurity updates that they've mandated should happen across the federal government. They won't be able to work on new cybersecurity guidance that they send out to not just the federal government, but critical infrastructure partners. And so CISA is one of those agencies that's particularly hamstrung and really does shut down, except for those really critical activities during a lapse in appropriations.
Well, that might be an impetus to move the negotiations along faster if there's a cyber attack. But what are you hearing as the latest on negotiations between the congressional Democrats and the White House?
Yeah, well, over the weekend, there wasn't really any progress made, but late on Monday, Senate Democrats sent over a new counterproposal to fund DHS through September with some of the reforms that they would like to see to immigration enforcement. We don't exactly know what is in that counter proposal, but a spokesman for Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer confirmed that to CBS News and multiple media outlets. That went over late Monday. So while we wait for details on that and what the White House's response is, the House is still on recess this week, and so they will have to be quickly called back if something happens midweek or so. If not, then the earliest that they are supposed to get back is on Monday of next week. And so as we've been talking about, this seems like this is going to be at least a week-long shutdown, if not longer.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for this update.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.